whole is back in session from its recess from yesterday. When we broke, we had concluded the general discussion on the bill with a panel that was here representing the administration. At this time, the Committee of the Whole and the Chair will call for continued discussion on the bill and for any proposed amendments at this time that anybody may wish to present on the bill. Before I do so, I just want to note for the record that we had requested some documents from the administration yesterday relative to discussions that have occurred between FAA, Federal Highway, and other entities that have been working on the T-Gen roadway project. As mentioned yesterday, this has been ongoing for 5, 6, maybe 7 years, and that there has been discussion over the years. We received 3 documents this morning, or this afternoon, and with 5 years of discussion, the only documents we're receiving were things dated today. And this is, for the record, each of you have been given a copy, one from Mr. Santos, received from Mr. Ron Simpson, of which is dated June 4th, 2013. One from Rochelle Takahara to Mr. Dominguez, once again dated June 14. We had asked for any record of discussions from previous meetings, and I guess this is you can judge for yourself what these are, but there certainly are not records of any previous meetings that may have occurred. Maybe they might be recapitulation. We also suggested yesterday that there may be an opportunity to wait for action on this bill until appraisals are completed, and we were told that they're working on those, and then we have an appraisal dated from yesterday. So I love the quick work, which continues to strengthen my position that perhaps we do need to and have a little bit of time to get the administration to get all of the information requested yesterday submitted. But those are the 3 pieces of information and documents that have been submitted to you, ladies and gentlemen, and you have them before you. At this time, once again, I'll go ahead and entertain questions and comments. I received Senator Uggan's hand first, and then I'll go to Senator Respicio.
Mr. Chair, can I go ahead and proceed?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and just as importantly, thank you for the information provided. I just needed to get a clarification, Mr. Speaker, from yourself as chair, and understandably the others who were previously here and impaneled are not here to respond, but there's been a couple of excerpts placed in the media where in fact assertions have been made that the $5.8 million would otherwise be lost if we do not act on this legislation. My understanding, based on the presentation yesterday and based on the discussion, was that the $5.8 million would not necessarily be lost, but would have to be redirected to be expended on other Guam projects. So is that a correct statement? Because of some of the statements that have gone out since yesterday that in fact have stated that the $5.8 million would otherwise be lost. So which is the correct statement as it applies to the 5.8, please? I understand that the panel's not there, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to put you, but just to regurgitate or to restate some of the discussions yesterday, my understanding is that the $5.8 million of federal highway funds, if they're not utilized to purchase the property outright from the airport authority, would have to be redirected to other Guam projects. My question is that a correct statement?
My recollection of the assurances given is that is correct.
Okay, because I just want to make sure that our people understand that obviously the legislature is going to act on this proposal, but I want our people to understand also that the statements that have been made is reflective of not losing the $5.8 million, but really it's if in fact the legislature does not act positively on this measure, then it would have to be redirected to other Guam projects, so otherwise it won't be lost to the local community. So I just wanted to state that for the record. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. I have Senator Respicio and then Senator Tiago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. When we first went into recess yesterday, or the reason which caused us into recess rather was a discussion between Senator Duenas and Mr. Clark regarding the notwithstanding provision and then also the reporting requirement. And in further discussion, I raised some concern that starting this bill off with the notwithstanding any provision of law, then making the $500,000 available to purchase one or more of these properties, that notwithstanding any provision of law in and of itself also means that we're going to waive the legislature's right to participate in the eminent domain process, to be the final approver of that process, as well as anything involving the purchases of these properties, to include the requirement of the two appraisals. And so what I'm offering as what I believe is a summary of where we left off yesterday, not necessarily I'm offering it as an amendment. I just want to generate some consensus. My first feeling is that the first line 2, the notwithstanding of the provision of law sentence should be deleted. In the same section, Mr. Speaker, there was also some discussion that we really didn't want to, we want to show good faith on the part of this government of Guam with respect to the Tejan Parkway project, but we needed to be careful, and it's like walking a slippery slope, and we didn't want to start this Tejan Parkway project without an end in sight. And so there was some discussion to delete the words required to complete the Tejan Parkway project so that it's not specifically tied to this Tejan Parkway project, but more so it shows good faith effort, and so that would be the second suggestion. There's some discussions on the appraisal submitting to the legislature, and that I would suggest that that the legislature receive these appraisals and then possibly do a 30 days default to approval, so that we would have an opportunity to determine whether or not we want to go forward with these mutually negotiated purchases of one or more of these lots. And if not, then the legislature can step in within that 30-day time frame. I understand that you also have some amendments that are along these lines, or generally based on the discussion we had yesterday. And before I offer my amendments as amendments, I'd like to give you the opportunity and privilege to present those suggestions from where you're sitting at. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. I think we're thinking along the same lines. It's just, requiring some accountability and some actions by the administration that would give greater assurances to this legislature that we know where we're going to end up, and that expenditure of funds without knowing where we're going to end up with regards to the total funds required is something that, for me, I desire to do, and we're working on some of those amendments. I will go ahead and entertain additional discussions, and then maybe we can have a short recess while I think the amendments you suggested can be certainly put into play, and then we can work with the legal counsel to make those amendments while we're continuing discussions. Senator Lim Tiaco, I'm going to recognize you for any additional comments or questions you have on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just as a follow-up to the two prior speakers, on the letter that's from Rochelle Takahara with the Department of Transportation, it clearly states in her letter that, yes, it is dated June 4th, that the Federal Highway Administration will de-obligate the funds if GovGuam is not able to allocate money by July 2013 to acquire at least 2 parcels needed for Phase 2. This gives the Federal Highway Administration enough time to notify the Federal Highway Administration in Washington, D.C. of the funds, so they may provide it to other states where they have projects ready to go for construction. She does go on to say that GovGuam will receive the return funds next year. So I just wanted to clarify that although it was clarified that we will get the money back, it will not be till the following year.
Right, which means that the following year in this case would be October 1st of
Correct.
this year.
Yes.
Right. So
which is
just-
past the timeline that we need to act on,
Correct.
on the bill.
Any other questions or comments? Senator Dueñas?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I mean, I know that there was discussion as to the confirmations of what was requested yesterday. I think these good people have put their name to these emails to verify that it is the true and correct information in terms of what they've requested, which resulted in us entertaining this legislation. So I would just say that if we're going to move forward at this point, especially taking into consideration the good majority leader's comments about where we left off yesterday, if we would then, while we have the folks here, the fiscal team and those that will have to deal with the final product, that we then go ahead and proffer the amendments to have a final product to see if, and to ensure that it won't basically hamstring the process in terms of what we put in terms of their ability to move forward. So I would just respectfully request that at this point, if there's no other commentary on the issue, to move forward on the amendments to ascertain what the final product would be. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Senator Munir Barnes?
Speaker Ben Pangilinan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Again, we're here because we have been told that we're trying to preserve $5.8 million in federal highway funds that would go towards not the construction of the Tijan Parkway itself, but towards acquisition of land for a portion of the required route for the Tijan Parkway. And that portion of the required route is approximately, if I can just recollect from yesterday, you're looking at, if the route is this long, you're looking at this long for the Tijan Parkway of 5.8 million, and the balance is going to be private property. So of, let's say, a mile, if I could look at the thing, if let's say the road is a mile, I would say in order to get 5.8 or two tenths of that mile, is what we need to do is buy the remaining 8/10 of the mile from private property owners, or somewhere in that neighborhood. It's certainly not half, and it's certainly not 2/3, I think, in terms of the way I look at it, just from a scale, in terms of looking at the map that was given to us yesterday. I know what it takes to acquire the property for, 20% of it. I have no idea what it's going to cost to acquire the remaining 80%. And yet, I am being asked to put money to acquire property up now without any idea for what that is going to mean to us. So that's one of my main concerns. The other idea or concern, of course, is that there were some thoughts yesterday expressed that could possibly remove the need to buy that property. Now, I know that they've assured us that, oh yes, we discussed the idea of having the airport just make that portion, the 2/10 of a mile, if that's correct, be a public access without the need to give up ownership over that property, without the need to pay $5.8 million. They've said, we had all these discussions, and we asked them, can you show us the record of where those discussions occur? And they say you can't do it. That We don't have that. I don't have that information, and I would like to see it, even if they assure me that, because it could be on how the question was framed. Was it framed in the way that we're framing it today? And if it was framed in a different manner, then could we get our Congresswoman to intervene to salvage that 5.8 and clarify that issue? I think that's an effort worth pursuing to ensure that we would have 5.8 million that can now go, rather than towards acquisition of property, airport or of airport property, go towards construction, so that we actually have to come up with less money for the actual construction of the Parkway, or go towards the acquisition of that. When we take that to go to construction, when we float the Garvey bonds, 5.8 that could have gone into construction may be able to go to other portions of the Parkway. So again, I don't see any record of that, and I really think that to me is important, because I think it's an option that I think we can pursue with our congressional delegate on that alternative, so that we don't have to use that 5.8 and so forth, so that we have that money available for either Tizan Parkway construction or additional construction of other vitally needed roads here on Guam. As we know, we have many. So I'm still concerned about that, and I'm still concerned about that condemnation can be a result of this authorization, that we are walking down a road of condemnation where we don't know what that cost is going to be, what the final cost is going to be. And the last time we walked that road and we said all we need is $3.2 million to condemn the property, we come back and find ourselves that not only do we need 3.2, but we now need 21 million, not to condemn the property, but for damages for properties that continue to be held by private landowners. And we have that as an obligation. It still is on landfill. And are we walking down that same roadway in terms of not knowing where we're going to end up? And I know that we have a July deadline that gets repeated in here. Everything in here is what was said yesterday. What I'm looking for is what was said yesterday, what was said 2 years ago,
Point of
last
information,
3 months.
Madam Chair, there's additional documentation which spells that out. Could we take a 1-minute recess, please? It's just been issued to us that shows the communication that does not allow for the transfer of the
I'm
property.
going to take that as a point of information. I have
Yes.
a legislative recess.
Thanks.
Yeah. Madam Speaker, no. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I do want to, again, I go back to just some requests that were made yesterday, of course, and I do want to thank Senator Duenas for sharing with the committee and the body additional information that was available only to him until a few minutes ago, and are now available to all of us, which gives us additional information. My position, though, on this bill at this time continues to be guided by what I feel is necessary in order to know exactly where we're going to end up with this Tejan Parkway and the obligation that this government is going to take in order to construct that parkway. As I mentioned, less than one half of the total required land for the parkway is going to be land that has to be purchased from private landowners by the government of Guam. And we are obligating ourselves to begin by purchasing 1 or 2 properties as have been indicated as a sign of good faith in order to preserve that $5.8 million for the acquisition of airport property to be placed then into the Tejan Parkway route. Now, the information we have from the FAA now seems to indicate that we not only have to take 1 step, but we have to take 2 steps. Because if you take a look at, and whether or not this action is sufficient in terms of, now I have another question, because if you take a look at the submission from Mr. Frank Santos, the consultant to the airport, and the response that he received based upon an email inquiry yesterday, or maybe even this morning, no, just this afternoon at 2:49 and 2:25 p.m. on June 4th, that first, the action to be taken by the legislature to approve Bill 125 is evidence of an affirmative commitment, $500,000, acquisition of property needed for phase 2, and represents a firm down payment. A down payment of Guam's future actions. And I don't know what those future actions are going to cost the government of Guam. I'm being asked to make a down payment on something that I don't know what it's going to cost me. And do I want to make that down payment? Maybe that's not what I want to make. Maybe the down payment is not to do Tejan Parkway, but something else. And then he says, once the FY13 funds are committed, FAA would need to see evidence of commitment to immediately purchase acquisition of as many parcels as can be acquired with the $500,000 in FY13 provided by Bill 125. So we go from 1 parcel as a sign of good faith to as many parcels as a sign of good faith. And then entering into land purchase agreement as an affirmative step. Then finally, FAA would view actions taken by Guam administration and legislature to commit FY14 funds to cover the acquisition of remaining property needed for phase 2 as an affirmative commitment. What is that? How much is that? And then FAA would view GovGuam's approval of the remaining funds needed under its FY14 budget as positive confirmation of Guam's budget to acquire the land needed to full build the Tejan Parkway. These points, as well as progress made by the Guam Legislature, should be included now in an MOU that can be finalized in signature. So now, who's going to sign? Now they want us to authorize an MOU or take this action, and it goes into an MOU for FY 2014 budget. We haven't even begun discussion of budget, but yet they're saying until we do that, then that $5.8 million is not preserved. That's why I'm saying, you know, we've got to get some federal intervention in here on our delegate to move this deadline if that's possible at all. And I think it behooves us to work within the next month or 2. And now they're asking for commitment of FY 2014 budget. And we're starting budget discussions next week. And we won't conclude those budget discussions till August 14, yet they're saying that that's part and parcel now of this good faith commitment, that perhaps Bill 125 is not enough, that we also got to do number 2 and number 3. And that's why I'm saying that somehow we have to just kind of
Did you see these?
slow down a little. I know there's a deadline of July, but really, what good is doing the 500,000 if we're not going to do the FY14 budget and commit to that? Will they keep the July deadline? Will we keep the 5.8? That's another question that needs to be asked, that perhaps they can send an email and get as fast as a response to that question as we got yesterday or this morning. Because now there's 2 additional conditions that weren't known yesterday and are now known, that
These guys.
FY 2014 budget number commitment must occur as well. And what is that number? It's the full build of the Tees and Parkway, and I don't even know what that number is. But they're asking us to commit to that, and the confirmation of GovGuam's commitment to acquire the land needed for full build based on FY 2014 budget. How much is that? And the budget that the governor submitted does not have, if I recall correctly, does not have 5 million or 10 million or 20 million for the full build, for the acquisition of land needed for the full build of the Parkway. Yet they're asking me this year to go and authorize this $500,000 at this time. And that's why I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, that if the July deadline is a July deadline, we've got a session scheduled in a couple of weeks. Let's get clarification on what do they mean by the funds needed under its FY 2000 budget as positive confirmation of GovGuam's commitment to acquire the land needed for the full build of the Tees and Parkway. Can the administration tell us what that number is? And are they going to resubmit a budget now based upon the approval of this $500,000 to resubmit the FY 2014 budget to now meet this commitment? Is this how we want to meet that commitment? I don't know that it will. I know that it's not prudent for this legislative body to do this at this time with those questions that are open-ended and answered. And I think that perhaps some of the amendments that were being proposed may provide some comfort, I think, to myself in terms of looking at a way to safeguard the commitment of this government to an unending requirement, unknown requirement maybe is a better word, for the full build of the Tees and Parkway at this time. And so those are my thoughts on where we're headed to in this bill, and I think what changes need to be made to this bill in order to provide some assurances that we will be able to make our commitment for the full build, if that's the direction we want to go, until such time that we can quantify what that cost is to the government and to the people of Guam. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, and we'll continue to work on the amendments that Senator Respicio had discussed, because I think those are in line with some of the issues that I'm raising.
Thank you, Speaker Pangolin. Anyone else wishing to speak? Are there any amendments? Yeah. Did you? We're going to take a short recess. I do know that there were several amendments that were going to be made. I'll go ahead and address Speaker Pangilinan for the amendments.
Thank you very much. The first amendment I'd like to propose, Madam Chair, begins with to add to Section 1 at the end of the last paragraph. And basically, it's for me, it's trying to before taking that full leap, trying to quantify this cost and understand exactly where we're going to end up, or at least set us on that path that gives me some clarity, and that this legislature does not commit something open-ended. And so the effect of this would be to add at the end of Section 1 a paragraph that reads, notwithstanding any other provision of law, all sums appropriated in this act shall not be obligated or expended until 30 days after A, 2 appraisals are submitted for all the properties required to complete the Tizen Parkway project phases 1 and 2, and pursuant to 2 GCA Chapter 2, Section 2107, including but not limited to the other lots themselves that were contained in the bill. And that lot remains the same. And then B, a final engineering project plan and cost estimate, including land acquisition costs, is submitted to Imagalahin Guahan and its legislatura in Guahan. Again, the intent of this is the administration continues to say, all we need is the appropriation. Give us the appropriation, and that's a sign of good faith. That's a sign of commitment. Well, we are giving you the appropriation. But in order to spend that appropriation, we want to comply, number one, with Guam law that requires that we know what that cost is going to be, so that's where the appraisals come in. And to me, it's very, very important, if not fatal to my support for the bill, is to know what the final cost is going to be, so that we know where we're going to go and what else we need to do in order to fully meet our commitment with this quote-unquote down payment of the Tizen Parkway. And so this, in my opinion, continues to satisfy the administration's request for the appropriation authority, continue discussions on land negotiations, and continue and finalize the construction plans by the DPW for the Tizen Parkway, continues the work with the appraisers to get final appraisal numbers on the land, and we saw that they can issue appraisals in very quick amount of time because we already got one appraisal for one piece of property, but we'd like to see what the total cost would be. So that's my proposed amendment to the bill, Madam Speaker. It's my first one.
Okay, I'm going to address Senator Respicio first on the amendment, then Senator Uggan, and then Senator Lucialco.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to Speaker Pangilinan for this amendment, which I think encompasses the discussion that we had over the last day or so on this issue. Madam Speaker, first of all, I want to ask if there's still a need to have the notwithstanding any provision of law. If I could move to delete that and to begin the amendment with all sums herein appropriated. Okay.
No objection.
Okay.
Are there any objections? No objections.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing I want to ask is, this amendment seems extremely reasonable. It requires the administration to provide certain information, but it's reasonable because it doesn't say the legislature shall do anything once they get the information, and I want to recognize the degree of reasonableness to which this amendment is being offered. I do want to say that my reading of it is if you say shall not be obligated or expended until after 30 days after, I think the controlling factor here will be the number of days, and so if on the 31st day they didn't do these things, for example, the two appraisals and the final engineering project plan, they might say, well, the law says do it within the first 30 days, it's 31 days, we didn't do it, so now we're gonna spend the money. And I mean, that's just my reading of it. And so since I'm saying it's a little bit, based on my reading, is ambiguous, I'm gonna suggest that we just say shall not be obligated or expended until the following is completed. And so if the following is, unless,
shall
or
not
if you,
be obligated? Can you read that again?
if the sponsor will yield, because if it says shall not be obligated or expended until 30 days after, and then it sets out two very specific requirements. If we, if since the controlling factor might be the number of days, what would happen on the 31st day?
To delete that until the following is.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Okay, or we can add in legal counsel here. First, we certainly want to take out after. So as a technical amendment, the word after before 30, I
On-
move to take
yeah.
that out.
Okay, if there are
30
no
days.
objections to delete the word after,
So we'll read until 30 days after,
yeah.
and then I want to add in the following is completed. So I guess you have two controlling factors. One, nothing happens for the next 30 days until such time the following is completed. And number two, it makes sure that the following is completed before any appropriations are expended. So even if on the 31st day, they still don't have the two appraisals and they still don't have a final engineering project, then this money shall not be appropriated unless it's the author's intent to exercise good faith on the part of the legislature, hoping to give them a 30-day window to do these things. And if in 30 days they don't do it, they can go ahead and appropriate the money, because
right, so
maybe if the author would yield to some clarification, is it,
Speaker Pangilinan, would you like to yield, please?
Yes. The intention is that they can't
Where?
obligate or expend the money until 30 days
Just wanted to make sure.
after they submit the engineering report, and of course, they get the appraisals for all the lots.
yeah, that's what I thought. So if they don't submit items A and items B, then the appropriation is not available.
Correct.
Correct, yeah. So I want to add in, just so we're clear, based on that intent, after the words after, you have to say the following is completed.
All right.
Yeah. So there's no timeline, and if it's not like after 30 days they don't do it, then the 31st day the appropriation will be available. They just have to do this no matter what.
Right.
Yeah.
So Senator Respicio, can you just rephrase that? All sums herein appropriated in this act shall not be obligated
Or expended
or expended.
until 30 days after, then you would add in the following is completed.
On that motion, does everybody follow? On that motion, are there any objections? No objections?
objections.
Motion carries. Yes. This is on the,
The amendment, the following is completed.
well, you can go ahead and state your question. No, I'm sorry, I apologize. Senator Respicio still had the floor on that amendment. Are you done? Okay, there was no objection, so it reads, just for the record, all sums herein appropriated in this act shall not be obligated or expended till 30 days after the following, and then it lists A, 1, 2, 3. Says the following, so. No, there was no objection. It was gavelled in. Okay, so now, Senator Respicio, do you have any more?
No, just I appreciate the body's willingness and also wanting to recognize the sponsor's willingness to display a degree of reasonableness. And again, after these requirements are met, this amendment, as amended, does not require any legislative action at that point. So thank you, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair.
Yeah, but you can make a decision. Okay, and the next one to speak was Senator Frank Uggan. Oh. Oh, so you have a couple
No, but
more.
on the,
But-
no,
but
that
on
was the
the
amendment
on the
to the,
main, on the main amendment.
on the main amendment.
Yes, on
Yes.
the main amendment, Senator Uggan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I just have an inquiry in regards to the impact of this particular provision in light of the amendment to the amendment that was adopted. My only concern here, and I do need some feedback if the good sponsor of the amendment would like to provide a response. Subsection B reads, a final engineering project plan and cost estimate, including land acquisition costs, is submitted to Magalang Guam and the Legislature in Guam within the next 30 days. I understand that if the acquisition costs, the possible acquisition cost will be reflective of the appraised value of the property. Is that sufficient to meet your definition of potential acquisition costs? Or are you talking about all negotiations being completed within the next 30 days and then that figure be submitted to this body? Because those are two separate factors. Within 30 days, I find it extremely difficult to see that the government of Guam is going to receive all these appraised values, go back to the landowners. I understand the appraisals won't be completed for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So even if within that timeline, all the appraisals are completed, they go to the original landowners, they try to negotiate in a matter of 2 weeks or even a week. I don't know if that's going to be sufficient time to allow the government of Guam and the private landowners to be able to come to a figure where both of them would be acceptable. So I guess my question, Madam Chair, and to the good speaker, is the phrase including land acquisition costs is submitted, the definition of acquisition costs. Because, like I said, if you're referring to potential costs reflective of the appraised value, that would be separate and apart from the actual negotiations. So please, if I can get clarification on that, please.
Pangilinan?
No, my intent here is that it is the acquisition cost. It is the negotiated purchase price. Because it doesn't require that they complete it within 30 days. It says that they can't buy the first piece. They can enter into a land purchase agreement, because if you look at that, they're saying that, that they have a acquisition of the land purchase agreement. So they can go and negotiate a land purchase agreement. They don't have to buy the property immediately to satisfy this commitment and good faith. It means that we have an appropriation, they can access that appropriation, they can conclude negotiations, enter into a land purchase agreement. Payment doesn't have to be made, but you have a land purchase agreement for that first piece to demonstrate good faith. Then in order to commit the remaining amount that we need for the acquisition of the remaining property for the full build out, then they need to complete land purchase agreements or negotiated agreements with each of these landowners for every piece that is needed. Then they come back to us and they say, this is how much we need for the additional land purchase agreement. How are we going to fund it now? And in the meantime, the administration continues discussion with every single landowner, as they are doing today, according to the representations made yesterday, that none of this is stopping. They're continuing to move on all of this. But we don't pay for the first property. Not that we don't agree to buy it, but we don't pay for the first one using the 500 until we know how much we're going to pay for all the rest.
Okay, actually, Madam Chair, that's an excellent explanation. I'm still trying to look at the overall process and see if, in fact, this particular language may be construed as being a showstopper within that 30-day timeline. Because you're absolutely right in terms of looking at the requirements. It says, all sums herein appropriated in this action are be obligated to expend it until 30 days after the appraisals are completed. We already have one appraisal before us right now, so there's anticipation in the next couple of weeks, next 3 weeks, the remaining balance, the remaining 5 appraisals will be completed. So that's within the 30-day time frame. Now, looking at the subsection B, a final engineering project plan and cost estimate. I don't know exactly where DPW is with the overall plan and design of the runway, and because it says a final engineering project plan and cost estimate, and then it goes on to read, including land acquisition costs, is submitted to the governor and the legislature. So would this, Madam Chair, it goes back again to the $5.8 billion. Is this an amount where, in fact, if the 30-day timeline is not met, can the Department of Public Works, working with the Federal Highway Administration, directly redirect those funds? I know we have document here that says, no, it would be absorbed by Federal Highway Administration and it will be allocated to other states. But one thing is missing in this entire presentation, and that is, what was the question posed to get this response? Because I would think that if they have some shovel-ready projects under the preparation of the Department of Public Works, that Federal Highway Administration, I don't see them rescinding the $5.8 million and not saying, okay, take the 5.8, you have a $4 million project here, because it's still under the guise of the Guam allotment, that you can redirect it over here for this local project. So I don't see, that's the only other question remaining. That's why I'm saying the reversion of the funds by Federal Highway Administration, unless there's zero projects, shovel-ready projects out there within the next 30 days, then I really don't see Federal Highway Administration stepping right in and rescinding those funds from our local community. So it goes back again to just expressing that concern, because the way I interpret that language, it says you will not expend, you will not obligate the $500,000 unless you have a final, keyword, engineering project plan and cost estimate, including land acquisition costs. And including land acquisition costs would be expediting the entire negotiation process within the next 30 days with the families, based on the appraisal, because obviously that's information that DPW needs, as well as the property owners need, in terms of solidifying any final figure for the government to procure that parcel of property. So those are really, the way it's language certainly would give me a little sense of hesitation, only because the word final, including land acquisition costs, that would put the owners, and trust me, when it comes to the government of Guam, and if we need to put the owners, they're giving us a timeline. Look, by July, we need to expend these resources. Otherwise, guess what? We may lose it. Well, then the onus is going to be also on the department to go out there and actually negotiate within a reasonable time frame. The only question is, land acquisition costs would have to reflect, like the speaker just said, would have to reflect a negotiated price with the 5 or 6 total 6 landowners within T10, and they come up with that general estimate. I think it's excellent to get that information, but I just don't want to see that definition and the final component being a showstopper in terms of actually realizing the commitment and the $5.8 million. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Speaker, for your response.
I have, on the amendment as amended, I have Mike Limchiaco, Chris Duenas, and Tom Adams.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I echo the same sentiments. I believe that the Section B that has been added, the final engineering project plan and cost estimate, including land acquisition costs, may hinder the entire project. I believe when we had the panel on board, they had mentioned that at least 2 of the residents are known to not want to sell. So who knows how long, and then they would have to go through the eminent domain process. So who knows how long that's going to take. And if the funds cannot be expended for the purchase of the first 2 or 3 lots, then this may just kill the entire project altogether. So my concern is that the way the amendments and the subsequent amendment that the good speaker has yet to introduce, which amends Section 1, specifically mentioned those 3 lots, and therefore the proceeding amendment would apply to all the lots, and therefore the money couldn't be expended for the initial 3 lots at all until Section B is fulfilled. So I'm not sure that would be a show of commitment that both Public Works and the governor's office were in here with with their consultants, saying that that is a show of good faith. Obviously, we could read into the law that in for the two lots that do require the eminent domain, whether or not that would ever go through the litigation process or the eminent domain process in order to arrive at a some sort of finality in the near future, is unreasonable. And I'm not sure that that does show a commitment. I'm not sure that that shows that we are committed to moving forward, and thus allowing us to use that $5.8 million to purchase the airport land. So I stand in objection to the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the aforementioned information by the good senator from Tamuning. You're from Tamuning, right? I also concur with his analysis. And then the second issue I have is on the final engineering project plan cost estimate. My understanding from the testimony that was given to us that even phase 1 will not be completed until August. So to already put this 30-day automatically right off the bat just puts them out of the ballpark of being able to accomplish that. So I second the objection.
Senator Tom Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I also rise in objection to this amendment. First of all, the item B there, a final engineering project plan. We're talking, first of all, the phase 1 plans is about 60% complete, and they expect to have that finished by the end of this summer, around August. The design for phase 2 is anticipated to require about 10 months, and that's after they have contracted for a designer. And I just don't have that warm and fuzzy that we're going to be able to put out a contract and not have it protested and all that. And so, as far as I'm concerned, it looks like we're putting roadblocks into this project. Might as well go back to FHWA, tell them take that $5.8 million, reallocate it for another project that we know is already pretty much ready to go to construction. For example, such as Route 5. That's that beat-up road from Mobile gas station up to Naval Magazine. There's a project that's ready to go that certainly could use that much. So, let's just quit messing around with this thing. And if we're not going to do it and put in all these roadblocks, then let's not even go there. I understand that there's this desire to act as responsibly as we can and be as precise as we can as to when we take a leap, we know precisely where we're going to land. But that's not the real world. And I think we need to take some kind of action. Let's initiate something and then develop the situation from there. But if we don't do anything right now, and the way I understand this appropriation is to bring people to the table so that we can get further progress on this project. But if we don't do anything, then we might as well just stay home. So I certainly rise in strong objection to this amendment. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator Atta. Anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment as amended? If not, Speaker Pangilinan, you can close on the amendment.
Thank you very much. I guess I just don't want to fall flat on my face when I take that leap and there's no place to land. And I don't think the people of Guam want to fall on its face like we are facing with Luzon. And everybody's asking where we're going to get the $21 million, where we're going to get the $25 million. That's where we're headed to. And I just think that with that unknown, we're going to commit ourselves, as we committed ourselves to $3.2 million to acquire Luzon to build the landfill. That's what we committed to. That's what we were assured was going to be required. And we developed the situation. Yeah, we did. We developed the situation. And that situation developed into a $25 million obligation of this government. for the landfill. And now, what kind of situation are we developing to pay for that? Well, I think I don't want to develop that situation and repeat it with the Tejan Parkway. This 30 days doesn't mean that the engineering plan has to be completed in 31 days or 30 days. It means that we can't pay for the first property using this appropriation until we know what these things are. And in the thing it says, you know, FAA views Gov Guam entering into a land purchase agreement as an affirmative step towards acquisition. So there's nothing to say that the administration can't enter into these land purchase agreements. It's to condition the land purchase agreement on the payment of knowing exactly how much it's going to cost us. Now you're telling me that, hey, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's 20 million or 10 million or 50 million or 100 million, we're going to build that parkway. That's what I'm kind of hearing and sensing from in here. Is that, yeah, it doesn't matter. We're going to build that parkway at any cost because we want to hold on to 5.8 million. If it ends up costing us 60 million, we're going to, hey, as you say, maybe if it's going to cost us 60 million, maybe there is a cheaper way of going. Maybe there's an alternate design. Maybe we want to go around the airport property. Because having to preserve 5.8 to buy airport property, and then it's going to cost us more on the other end, which we don't know what it's going to be. Maybe we ought to go back and just go along the cliff line. Do we need to condemn all that property? We went right along the cliff line. Are we going to need to buy as much property? Remember, the 5.8 is the difference in the design and the construction, or the construction cost, I think, of going with alternative 2 or alternative 4, whatever that alternative 4 is. We're saving 5.8 if we buy airport property. Maybe we should go back. If acquisition cost for the private property is going to cost us 20 million with this design that takes us through airport property, how much is it going to cost us with a design that doesn't take us through airport property and goes along the cliff line? I don't know what that number is. And again, as the good senator mentioned from Tamuning, yes, these discussions have been occurring, but those questions are not being answered today. The results of those discussions, of those discussions and those numbers are not being put on the table at this time. But they want us to put dollars on the table, and they want us to commit to the future cost of this parkway without knowing what that cost is going to be. And again, the 30 days doesn't mean that that we have to have the final engineering design. No, it just means that appropriation can't be spent to pay for the property until we know what these costs are. And all of these are continuing to be worked on. And as we mentioned, you know, it doesn't matter because at some point they're going to close Central Avenue. They're saying that they're going to close it. Whether or not we buy the property, it's going to get closed. Whether or not we commit to funding it, it's going to get closed. Because when we start construction on that site, they're going to close it. No matter what. So this is not to avoid the closure. This is to avoid the permanent closure so that we can commit to a cost we don't know what it's going to be. So wouldn't it be prudent for us to demonstrate our commitment and find out these costs? Again, what if they come back and say you need $60 million for the rest of it? Is that the situation we want to develop? That now we're committed because we bought airport property for 5.8? Why acquire that piece of property with all these unknowns? Why not, as they mentioned, allow them to negotiate, commit to buying that property by doing the appraisal, by doing the appropriation, allowing them to go and work out a land purchase agreement, and then do all these other things that are going to have to be done anyway during the construction phase, during the planning phase. They're going to have to be done anyway. But I think the other way kind of locks us into that one single way and one single alternative. And I don't know that that is a place I want to put the people of Guam in with regards to that situation to develop. For this situation to develop into the Luzon situation. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm not trying to stop. I'm not trying to put a roadblock. They're saying that they're doing all these things, so where's the roadblock if they're doing it all anyway? And I just think that the 30 days here maybe is being misread. It just says, you know, that all these other things must continue to happen so that we can get the best information we can to make the final decision that we need to make for the full, as they mentioned, for the full build of the Tizen Parkway. And I don't think that you know, we should just rush into this thing for that full build and find out, you know, it's a $20 million wall or a $40 million wall. Thank you, and Sidus Mas.
Thank you. On the amendment, there was an objection. So all those in support of the Ben Pangilinan and our Respicio amendment as amended, signify by raising your hand. Yeah, he closed. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion fails. Speaker Pangilinan, you still have the floor. I know you have a couple of more amendments.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The next amendment I have is to add a section 3. And it basically would add a section 3 that abandoned or unused acquired land. And it would read, if the Tizen Parkway project is abandoned or any acquired land unused, the original landowner shall reserve the right to buy back the land or any unused portion of the land without paying any appreciation price, but only the per square meter price received when the original owner sold the land. If you recall yesterday, Gov Guam's plan was to take the property and buy it and then build the parkway. Now they're going to acquire all these lands, and I guess they don't know how much land to acquire, and they're just going to buy all this until they figure out what their final engineering plan is. So again, this is going back to knowing where we're going. So the guy owns 11,000 square meters. They're going to go in there and pay for 11,000 square meters, then build the property, and then they find out that only 8,000 square meters of that 11,000 is used for the parkway itself. And then Gov Guam's plan that was presented yesterday is they would take the remaining 4,000 square meters and sell it to the airport. If they knew, if we had a final engineering plan and a final design plan, our upfront costs, we could just acquire just the 8,000. Why acquire the other 4? Leave that to the original landowners who now have more valuable land to develop. But their plan that they've told us, and actually it was even more disturbing when I first heard about the plan, because the plan very clearly was stated to members of this body that because the property is encumbered with these restrictions of the reversionary clause and the other EPA requirements and so forth, that it was almost worthless to the original landowner, so we're going to go in there and buy it at the worthless price, clean up the title because now it's a government-to-government transfer, and then we're going to sell it to the airport at the appreciated value. And I said, you mean we're going to be in the business of flipping property? We're going to take advantage of the landowner because of the title, and then once we clear it, we're going to take advantage of the appreciated cost and sell it to the airport. Well, I just don't think that's fair. So what this amendment would say is, and again, I go back, if we had the final engineering plan, then we know exactly how much land, and we can only We can only condemn or acquire what is only needed and leave the remaining to the original landowners, but that's not the plan. The plan is to acquire every single parcel identified in this to the full measurement of the parcel. So I'm saying that if that's the way you want to proceed, fine, but I don't want to take advantage of these landowners because of the place that we've put them in with regards to the title. So if they only need 8,000 square meters, they acquire 11, then the remaining 3,000 square meters shall be offered back to the original landowner, and he can buy it back based upon what he was paid for it. That's really the intent of this legislation, based upon the representation made yesterday for what the government's plan is.
On that motion, are there anyone wishing to speak? Senator Frank Hagan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I certainly rise in support of this amendment, acknowledging that should the first portion of this, the Tejan Parkway project, is abandoned or any acquired land unused, I like that the second portion of that, any acquired land unused, not necessarily the Tejan Parkway project abandoned, but as it applies, if in fact the property is still usable, I certainly think that it makes a lot of sense to at least give the original landowners that option to reacquire that property back in which they had relinquished and sold to the government of Guam with the understanding that it was going to be utilized for the Parkway project. So I certainly stand in support of this, and I hope that, I encourage our colleagues to do likewise. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hagan. Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I also support this amendment. This is really Tejan landowners reversionary clause. And so these are things that I like to see in the things that the legislature does, because it really speaks to protecting the landowners and their rights. And I want to recognize and commend Speaker Pangilinan for doing something like this. But I want to ask the mover of this amendment if we should put a timeline on this, on when, or some trigger when the project is determined abandoned or when the acquired land is unused, because we know as hopeful as we'd like to be, we can easily see this happening much longer than whatever this administration anticipates it happening. Do we say within 5 years of the date of this act, or whatever reasonable time frame, so that once that date is met, then that property is deemed to be abandoned? Or
Speaker Pangilinan, would you like to respond to that inquiry?
As far as abandoning the Tejan Parkway, I think that's a decision the administration would make, that either they change the plans or so forth. With regards to unused land, I would think it would be after the completion of the construction of the Parkway. So those would be the two distinctions I would make on this amendment. So, maybe within 2 years after the completion of the Parkway, that the landowner shall have a right to repurchase the property. And on the abandonment, I don't know how to define. I mean, it will be where the administration determines it will not construct the Parkway, or
but they
something
can
to
but
that
they can
effect.
say that it's still an active project, even though we can see it's not an active project.
Or the Parkway is not funded within 2 years of the completion of the engineering and okay. So
Senator Respicio, does that answer your concern, or
No, I think
would you
there's.
like further?
I'm hearing there might be an amendment to this amendment that the sponsor is open to, that the mover of this amendment is open to.
yeah, I'm open to kind of defining a time frame if that's the if there's a way to do that, and maybe additional discussion would provide me with some additional insight as to what may be acceptable.
While that's being thought out, I do have Senator Morrison, then Senator Senator Tom Adams.
Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I believe, well, the mover of the motion suggested that possibly DPW should just purchase, or Gov Guam should just purchase whatever piece of property is needed to put in a 4-lane highway. And then whatever remains, that should be left to the original landowner. I guess that's one point that was made earlier. And if I understand correctly, though, the right-of-way acquisition procedures really wouldn't allow us to do that, such that, if it's a 100-foot wide strip of land and all you needed was 70 feet, we just go in and buy 70 feet, rendering the remaining 30 feet really pretty much useless. So as a result, there are provisions within the right-of-way acquisition that you go in and you either acquire the whole thing or you have to compensate for basically making the remnant unusable. So I'm not sure that that's really practical to be able to just go in there and just buy the sliver that is needed. I like the idea that if the Tizan Parkway, after a certain time frame, does not come to fruition, that then the landowner should be able to purchase back the property. But quite frankly, I think that in fairness to the landowner, and we're telling him, here's some money, so now whatever plans he may have been making for that property, he moves on, and then he comes back and say, oh, well, I guess we fell through. And I know that in the private sector down in Tuman, developers were buying properties with the proviso that if you don't put something up within, several years, the land returns to the landowner, and whatever money was given to him is kept by that landowner. So if we're going to do this, then if we're not going to go through with the Tizan Parkway project, then I would just as soon say, if we don't do something by the 5th year, the whole thing goes back to that landowner that the property was originally acquired for. So as written, I could not support this amendment.
On the amendment, anyone else wishing to speak? Senator, you spoke earlier, I do apologize. Senator Michael Mtiaco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned, though, that if I don't know what the applicability of the reversionary clause would still be in effect if that land is not still used for the road. I would assume that it's still in effect. So if the Tizan Parkway does not come to fruition, I believe the reversionary clause is stipulated by the federal government is still in effect. So I'm not sure there's a conflict in what would be our local law as opposed to the federal reversionary clause requirement. That's my only issue as it relates to whether it doesn't come to fruition at all. Now, the amendment on whether there's subsequent land that is unused, I have no issue with. I agree with it. That if we've built the road, if we built the Tizan Parkway and it's in operation and there's land that's not being used that is within any real usable fashion, that absolutely the landowner should purchase it back for what the government purchased it from. So I don't have an issue with that. However, the idea that the Tizan Parkway, if the Tizan Parkway is not built, that they would be allowed to purchase it back, I'm not sure how that would coincide with the existing federal reversionary clause. So that's my issue with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mike. Senator Frank Hawken, do you have an amendment to this amendment?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to our colleagues. Yes, just looking at the amendment, Madam Chair, and based on some of the explanations that has been provided, I think it's only appropriate that on the second line where it reads, or any acquired land unused, that the words be inserted for the Parkway. Because obviously you may have our government stepping in and saying, okay, we didn't use this parcel of property for the Parkway, but we can find other uses. And I'd like to propose that amendment to the amendment, Madam Chair, to read, or any acquired land unused for the Parkway. And I think that that would certainly be very consistent with the explanation that was provided with regards to the amendment. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Okay. So it would read, on the second line, abandoned or any acquired land unused for the Parkway, comma. On that amendment, are there any objections? No objections, motion carries. So back to the main amendment. Are there anyone else wishing to speak? Speaker Wanpat, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, when I read the amendment, of course, and I'm looking at the map that was provided to us, and those of you who still have a copy of it, it's like the third, I'm not sure the third one where it says preferred alternative 4 requires acquisition of property from GIA to TJ Cliffline property owners. And when you look at it, of course, the purple bold line, the way I'm looking at this, and I may be wrong, and so this is, you know, a question that I want to ask, of course, of the mover of the amendment, is that if what the mover is saying is that when you look at the map, you see remnants, of course, to the right and to the left of this purple line, that these are the portions, of course, that is being addressed that could be then acquired again by the original landowners.
Yes,
Mr. Bennett?
that is correct. That
Okay.
would be, because again, if you look at one of the presentations there, is that the presentation by the administration or DPW was that the remaining, that the purchase of the remaining lots after acquiring the first lot could be financed by the sale of the remnant lots to the airport. So they do envision, they have plans, they know, where we don't know, how those properties are going to be dissected by the Parkway itself, and that they know that if there is 11,000 square meters, that 8,000 will be occupied by the Parkway and 3,000 will be remaining, and they will be usable, because they're planning on selling that property after acquiring it, clearing the title, increasing the price, because only because you're a government can you do that, and then, you know, denying the landowner the ability to develop that property for the economic activity that's going to occur along that airport corridor. As they say, $59 million of economic activity is going to be generated. Now, because of the acquisition and the way that they're acquiring it, you're going to deny that landowner the opportunity to develop that, his property, you know, to take advantage of that economic opportunity. And I think we should try to preserve that right of that landowner to the economic value of that property that is not needed by the government for the TZ Parkway.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, as I look at the map, of course, and several lots here, basically, you know, is showing where lots, the 88, 87, 98, 85, and so on down are really all right down the middle of the property. And of course, I had gone outside to ask the question, why is it that the road could not have been built then right along the fence of the airport, which would leave a larger portion of the property available that could be usable for the original landowners. And And the argument, of course, is that, well, you know, these would be basically unusable lands because they're down the ravine of the cliff. But, you know, any engineer will tell you, and I've seen this in the mainland, where properties have been built over cliff lines. I mean, you know, during our day, in the old days, of course, we never really would have thought that we could build over the cliff, but nowadays you can. And I agree is that cliff lines are, you know, valuable property, whether they are at the airport or they're in my backyard, you know, in Malolo, or they're the cliff line up there on, you know, Tuman. I mean, cliff lines are cliff lines, and maybe in the old days we didn't know how much they were worth, but today we surely do. And if you look at the GIAA Area 2, you will see how that road, the contour of the road is exactly along the fence, and that's the idea in which I think that the road should actually be built, and lands acquired should be built and acquired based on that. But it's the same thing that one of our colleagues mentioned earlier. It's like we're, you know, caught between a rock and a hard place when you get FAA and FHA saying, two federal governments telling us basically what we can or cannot do. And because of just structurally looking at this configuration of how the roads is going to be going right down the middle of a property, it's like really drive down in Maleso, and you would see that a person's property from the hillside is divided by the road, but then their continuation of owning property, a sliver of land, beach land, but because again the government has decided to build a road right down the middle of a person's property, but doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have to continue to own that property. So, and with that, you know, same thought, of course, and knowing how that's done even here on island, knowing that yes, properties can be built on cliffline, and yes, I like the idea that if the owner then, you know, would like to acquire it back after, you know, of course, the project is just not going to continue, that they are able to buy it back without paying for any appreciation price, because I know it would appreciate once the road is in, but to the rightful owners, the argument should be is that yes, they get it back at that same cost. So I do support the amendment.
Are there anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? If not, would you like to close?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I certainly appreciate the comments, and I do know, and I am very familiar with the rights-of-way acquisition. And so in proposing this amendment, I kept in mind, of course, that the property would have to be acquired, that you couldn't leave remnant property that is unusable, unacquired, basically, if you were acquiring it for a right-of-way, and leave a landowner with, you know, 30 square meters of property. That you can't do that. The rights-of-way manual requires you that you make that property owner whole, and that means you pay him for the entire lot and not leave him 30 square meters. The reason why I'm doing this is because we know that the government of Guam already knows, based by the presentation made yesterday, that they are going to have valuable pieces of property left over from the acquisition, because they're counting on that and being able to resell that property at the appreciated value, because that's the presentation they made. And that's what I'm saying. That portion that is usable, that the government was planning on flipping, you know, to the detriment of the landowners, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't take advantage of the landowners. So the idea that And if the proposal would be, well, no, we'll pay you for all the property, and when we don't construct it, you get to keep the money and we give you the land back, hey, I love that amendment as well. And if I can get support for that amendment, I'd introduce that amendment instead of this. But still have the opportunity to buy back that. Again, it's because of the representations made that I think this is needed, that I just, to the greatest degree possible, don't want to take advantage of these landowners because a position that we've put them in and they find themselves in with regards to the title. Now, the idea of, well, if they buy the property back or if the reversionary clause, to respond to that concern by one of my colleagues, it puts them in the same situation they're today. The idea is that if we think that the federal government today can just say, all right, legislature, governor, forget all your arguments, forget 5.8 million. We're going to go back right now and take those properties back. Well, they haven't. So if we abandon the property or we give them back the property when we construct it, then I think maybe that even clears up the title even a bit more with regards to these landowners. And if they have and desire to purchase back their property and are going to do it, then we've improved their economic condition with regards to that property. And if the property is abandoned and they buy it back for what we bought it, or the project is abandoned, then they're in the same place they are today. They have a piece of property that right now they are using for whatever purpose that they deem needed, to place members of their family in those homes, to rent them out, as some of them are doing now. They're leasing those properties out, as housing. So it puts them in the same situation until the government decides, the federal government, that we are going to exercise the reversionary clause. I'm going to come back and we're going to kick everybody out, take these properties again like we did after World War II, and put them back in the federal inventory. So if the property gets abandoned and landowners get their property back, it puts them in the same situation they're in today, so they're no better off or no better worse. They're better off because they have property. And if the property is usable, as we know some portions are going to be, some are not going to have any remnant lots, and so some are not going to be able to buy back any portion. But we know, based upon the representation and the presentation made yesterday, that some landowners will have residual property that is usable, valuable, and I think we should preserve their right to that economic benefit of that property by allowing them to purchase it back. And so that's the amendment as presented, and I hope I can get the support.
If there are no objections? You did, there's an objection. All those in favor of the Ben Pangilinan amendment, please signify by raising your hand. 5, 6, 7, motion carries. You have one more, it's
Madam
part of the
Chair, now that that motion passes, can I just please generate some discussion as
There's one more? Yeah. Yeah. The amendment passed. Yeah, and he has one more amendment. There was 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. Split.
Oh, yeah. No.
I do apologize, the count was 7, I thought I was 8. But just for clarification's sake, just for clarification's sake, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Yes. 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion fails. 6, 7. I thought I was 8, but they confirmed that they did not.
But
vote
when
for
you
it.
gavelled, it passed, it gavelled, there was no objection, so that's why I asked us.
There was an objection, Senator.
There was an objection, but then your ruling was that it passed. And your ruling wasn't challenged, so my thinking is that that motion passed, so I wanted to generate some discussion on how we defined the abandoned and how we.
And I will take that.
But the clerk indicates that there was 7 votes, right? So even if you gavelled it, it still doesn't stand.
Senator Duenas, if I may, there was, when Senator Ada asked for the vote, I went back to the clerk and I asked for the official numbers, and I thought that based on the count that I made the 8th vote, but it did not clear. So I asked for clarification, it came back, and when we voted for that same section, the official vote went from 7 to 6. So motion fails.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair.
And now we still go back. Speaker Pangilinan had the floor. He has one more amendment, and I did say.
Because
that it was
procedurally,
5.8.
if we had 8 and it passed, and then you invited the body to re-vote, you would need 8 votes to approve
That's right.
that change of vote. Yeah.
But it did not pass. It was, yes. So Speaker Pangilinan, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have another amendment that I'd like the body to consider, and that is to Section 1. And the amendment would fund the appropriation rather than from the escheated money to the general fund. It would be from the unappropriated fund balance of the Guam Territorial Highway Fund to the Department of Public Works for the acquisition of the property for the Teason Parkway. The discussion on this, of course, is that it's a highway project. There is money available. And again, I do want to acknowledge Senator Rodriguez, because he had a bill on this, and in that one bill he had, he was funding an appropriation to revenue tax out of the highway fund. And when those discussions occurred, there was an idea of switching the appropriation that was unrelated to highway and taking out that appropriation and providing that appropriation in another bill and placing the highway fund to be the one to pick up the acquisition of this lot, so that the total amount for the projects that Senator Rodriguez had in his bill does not change in terms of what would be available for him. So it's just a swapping of the appropriation. And then, of course, the other clarification I wanted to make is that it's to expend funds appropriated in the section to purchase Lot 2907 and Lot 2094, 2097, 2094, and 2094-1 if the landowners voluntarily agree to the sale. And then nothing in herein shall authorize eminent domain proceedings for any of these or the other lots. And again, this is to restrict the appropriation to the acquisition of 3 lots instead of all of the lots that would then obligate us for the balance of these acquisition costs without knowing what that cost would be. And so that's the intention of this amendment.
I do have to speak on the amendment, Senator Ada, then Speaker Wampat. Senator Ada, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I enthusiastically support this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Ada. Speaker One, Pet, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the mover of the amendment is correct, because when we had the discussion in the public hearing room, we noticed, yes, that all of the projects that were to list specific appropriations for highway projects, that was an issue that was brought up. And I took actually the comment from Senator, that the previous senator who enthusiastically supports the amendment, that we were going to find then another funding source for this, and as a result of it is that it is an exchange. So I did introduce then the bill to address that specific item for rev and tax, that it not be from the highway fund. So I do support this amendment.
Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad that we're able to rectify some of the issues that came about in the public hearing on Bill 97, and also thank the mover of the amendment for acknowledging what has transpired then. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a notwithstanding amendment to this amendment, that we now also include 400,000 from the escheated funds escheated to the general fund for the transaction processing system for the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
I'm going to take a 10-second recess because I have to look at the legality of that portion. Recess.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? If not, would you like to close? Or are there any objections? If there are no objections, I'll go clear it. Motion carries. Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to call the body's attention to the first amendment moved by Speaker Pangilinan and myself, and I want to renew the first half of this amendment as a new amendment because at the time Speaker Pangilinan was proposing this, there was more discussion on sub-item B, and I'm going to make an attempt here to move this also on his behalf, but we have everything up until item 6. And so the amendment will read, all sums herein appropriated in this act shall not be obligated or expended until 30 days after the following is completed, then everything on sub-item A will stand.
Right, and we'll
Because this will
delete,
just, and it'll be consistent with the amendment that we just adopted.
right, and we'll delete and, A
Correct.
and D after 6, and
Correct.
item B.
Correct.
On that motion,
Yeah, no, yeah, notwithstanding, you take out the first couple words.
right,
Yeah.
all sums. Okay, on that motion, are there any objections? Senator Limchiaco, you're,
Just a point of information. Could you please explain that again? So A and B is not being added to the
No,
amendment?
just A, but we're not gonna add the word and then B. Everything on B. So it starts off with,
Point of information.
and this is added to the end of the section 1, the new section 1 that we just adopted, that'll begin with all sums herein appropriated in this act shall not be obligated or expended until 30 days after the filing is completed. And then you have A, then 2 appraisals, then everything from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then you'll delete and then you'll delete sub-item B. I just didn't want to have to retype it and make more copies and
we're saving
Yeah.
trees. On that motion, Senator Limchiaco, on that motion, if there's no objections, motion carries. I will give the floor back. Still, Speaker Pangilinan, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I also, I do want to just, for the benefit of the body, nope.
Okay. With that being said, are there any more amendments or any more discussion on the main bill as amended? If not, Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that we rise from the Committee of the Whole with all the amendments made that were adopted while in the Committee of the Whole be intact with the Committee of the Whole's recommendation to pass Bill 125-32 in this first special session.
Are there any objections? If no objections, motion carries. We'll take a brief recess just to reset.
Legislature is back in session. Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is Masi. Madam Speaker, I wish to report back to the body that the Committee of the Whole has risen from its deliberation on Bill number 125 with a recommendation that the bill be placed in the third reading file with all amendments intact.
On that motion, and without any objection, so ordered. We are the third reading. I'm in the voting file. Senator Respicio, for the members that are not present, you want to make that motion now then?
Madam Speaker, can we just take a minute recess to clarify something?
I'm going to take a, like my legislative secretary says, a legislative recess. the legislature's back in session. Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to bring Bill 125-32 as amended by the Committee of the Whole back to the second reading file. I guess it's as amended in the Committee of the Whole.
Senator, I realize that you're using the notwithstanding, but in the rules it says that if the legislature fails to follow the recommendations of the Committee of the Whole, the bill or resolution or matter under consideration automatically dies and goes to the inactive file, as provided in Section 1.02 F9 in.
Yeah, we adopted the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, and then the bill proceeded to the third reading file. And so I'm doing a notwithstanding motion to bring the bill from the third reading back to the second reading file to make one amendment. I think the rule you're citing is if there's no consensus with respect to what the Committee of the Whole is recommending, and and the body can't come to 8 votes, then rather than being deadlocked as a body, the issue just goes to the inactive file so the legislature can proceed with other business before it.
On the motion, are there any objections? There's an objection. So in favor then to send it back to second reading, please raise your hand. Motion carries.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, so now that Bill 125-32, as amended in the Committee of the Whole, is in the second reading file, I move to amend this new section 1 that we just adopted, and the paragraph that begins with the Department of Public Works is hereby authorized to expend the funds appropriated in this section to purchase lot number 2097, then it says total area 9,145 square meters. I move to change the word and to or. And so it'll say or lot number 2094 and lot number 2094-1, and then the same language continues. And the reason for doing this is to just assuage some concerns by some of our members that leaving the word and could leave it to the interpretation that we're providing $500,000 to purchase all of these lots, whereas it was from the discussion, we're saying that the first $500,000 is to be made available for these lots, and then we're requiring the appraisals and other requirements based on the bill that was passed. And so I move to amend the word and to or.
On that amendment then is to delete the and, or you put and or, which, I'm sorry, Senator, can you repeat that again? Is and or?
No, that's good. No, just delete the word
Delete the
and then
put the word
yes,
or
yes,
in
ma'am,
place of
yeah.
and. Okay. On the amendment? I'm going to take another recess. The legislature is back in session. Senator Respicio, on your motion, then the amendment you have is to delete the and replace it with the word or. Okay. On the amendment, no objections? So ordered. Speaker Pangilinan?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm working on an amendment right now, so I'd like to request a short recess while I finish it up.
Okay. Take another legislative recess. question. Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized on an amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker has passed out the amendment, and basically, Madam Speaker, what we're trying to do is preserve the landowners' rights. I mean, you know, these landowners had their properties taken after the war. They were denied the use of the property. When it came back to them, there were conditions on the property, and now we're here to try and take that property back, and we could do it by either purchase or possibly eminent domain, as the administration has indicated, that if they have to, they'll use that power. So we're trying to grab this property back after we've given them justice by giving their property back from the takings of the federal land when the federal government has said we don't need it anymore. You know, and that's the story you hear from landowners after the war. When the federal government, after releasing us from a brutal and occupation of a hostile enemy, you know, we said, take our land, use it for national defense. When you're finished, return it. We have completed that cycle of justice on behalf of the landowners, and now we're going to come back and under this guise of, you know, federal oversight and overbearing arms saying, you can't have, we're going to need that property back because we want to do this Teason Parkway, and we're going to take that property one way or the other. And I'm saying that if we take the property and we don't do anything with it, we don't construct, then let's give it back. Let's, again, repeat that cycle of justice and give the original landowners who have been denied these properties an opportunity to get their property back if we don't do anything with it for what we take it for. And if we do, in fact, take the property and we do construct the parkway and put it into public use, that any unused portion of that property, as the administration has said there will be, that if it's usable, the landowners can make beneficial use of it for, you know, the economic well-being of their families, that they be given the first opportunity to do that. But we don't also leave it open-ended and hanging, so that when the construction of the Teason Parkway, if it happens, is finished, we know all the properties required, there's unused property that has economic value to these landowners, that they get the right to buy it back for 2 years after the completion of the construction. And if they don't exercise that right within 2 years, then that property then remains with the government. And so I just think that, again, these landowners have suffered injustice with regards to the acquisition of their property after World War II. And we made them whole by returning the property rather than having the government keep it after being returned and deemed unnecessary for the federal mission and the Department of Defense mission here on Guam as well as in the Pacific. And so I would like to, again, plead with my colleagues to recognize this, of what these lands signify to these individuals, that it is the injustice that we've cured, and we don't want to now, as our own government, under our own control, perpetrate an injustice on these landowners that would deny them the use of that property if the government doesn't need it. Thank you, and hope for support, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, no objections? So ordered. Senator Respicio. Oh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Recognize me now.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam
You are
Speaker.
recognized.
So on the motion to place Bill 125-32LS, and so read as amended in the Committee of the Whole and further amended on the floor, I move that this be placed in the third reading file.
On the motion, without any objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To vote unengrossed.
Yeah, now that we're in the third reading, now we're in the voting file, I move that we be permitted to vote on this bill without engrossment, and that we excuse senators who are not present for this vote, namely Senator Nicholas and Senators Uggan and Yamashita.
And McCready.
And Senator McCready. So Senator Nicholas and McCready are off island, and Senator Uggan and Yamashita, they were with us for the entire discussion. However, they weren't really aware that we were going to vote on this bill, and they've indicated to us that we can still vote on the bill if they're excused by the body.
So on that motion, without any objections, so ordered. Okay. I'd like to ask the clerk if we can please read the title of the bill. Bill number 125-32.
Bill number 125-32LS, introduced by Judith T. Wanpat, EDD, T.C. Ada, Tina R. Munoz Barnes, R.J. Respicio, C.M. Dueñas. An act to appropriate the sum of $500,000 is cheated to the general fund pursuant to Section 21116 of Chapter
Yeah, it's on engrosso.
of Chapter 21, Division 2, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated to the Department of Public Works for the purpose of funding the acquisition of property for the Teesum Parkway project.
Roll call.
Senator Tom Adda. Senator Tom Adda, aye. Senator Tony Adda. Senator Tony Adda, aye. Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, excused. Vice Speaker Cruz. Vice Speaker Cruz, pass. Senator Dueñas. Senator Dueñas, aye. Senator Limtiaco. Senator Limtiaco, aye. Senator McCready. Senator McCready, excused. Senator Morrison. Senator Morrison, aye. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Munya Barnes, aye. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Pangilinan, nay. Senator Respicio. Senator Respicio, aye. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, aye. Senator Sinicolas. Senator Sinicolas, excused. Speaker Wampat.
I'm good.
Speaker Wampat, aye. Senator Yamashita. Senator Yamashita, excused. Vice Speaker Cruz. Vice Speaker Cruz, nay.
Good for board. Bill number 125-32 LS received 9 yea votes, 2 nays, and 4 excused absence. Bill number 125-32 is duly passed by this body. Senator Respicio, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I move to adjourn this first special session, Sinodai, right? This special session, Sinodai.
This special
Yeah.
session. So the motion is to adjourn this special session.
Sinodai,
Senate aye.
yeah.
No objections? So ordered.